Chronic spontaneous urticaria, or chronic hives with no known cause. It's so unpredictable. It's like playing pinball. Itchy, red bumps start on my arm, then my back. Sometimes my legs. Hives come out of nowhere. And it comes and goes. But I just found out about a treatment option at treatmyhives.com. Take that, chronic hives. Learn more at treatmyhives.com.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Commercial Insurance. Business owners, meet Progressive Insurance. They make it easy to get discounts on commercial auto insurance and find coverages to grow with your business. Quote in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company. Coverage provided and serviced by affiliated and third-party insurers. Discounts and coverage selections not available in all states or situations.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. My guest today is David Opes, the former journalist, publisher, screenwriter, and film producer. He's also the author of a fantastic new book on the automotive industry. It's called Saving Ourselves from Big Car, which we're going to be talking about today. David Opes, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you, Mike. Nice to be here.
So, big car, it's sort of your shorthand term for really what's an entire system. I mean, automakers, oil, steel, insurance, media, government. And so my first question, I guess, is why frame things so broadly? Or maybe looking at the other way, what do we miss when we talk only about the auto industry?
Well, that originally was my intent, Mike. And the deeper I got into it, actually, the whole thing began when I was driving my lovely granddaughter down into Los Angeles, and we got stuck in the ever-present traffic jam. And I said to her, I hate traffic. And she looked back at me and smiled and said, Papa, you are the traffic. And I said, Oh, my God, she's right. How did this happen? And so, being a bit of an investigative reporter, I started to look into it. And the deeper I went into it, the deeper I went into it, the worse it became. And I realized that it wasn't just one organization, like the people who build the cars. It was the people who build the roads, the people who are lobbyists, the people who are supposedly protecting us in our government. We're all tarred by the same brush, which is corporate greed. And, Mike, the very first book I ever did 50 years ago was a book called In the Name of Profit, Profiles in Corporate Greed. And it was a collection of stories about pillars of the community who had taken shortcuts at the public's safety to make money. And it was terribly sad to find that 50 years later, not much had changed. This still is the quarterly return is more important than the protection of individuals. Let me give your audience just a 1-minute history of how we got to this place. At the beginning of the 20th century, the biggest problem in urban America, believe it or not, was the horse. Because so many of them would come into the city. New York City had 130,000 a day would come in, and each of them would leave 26 pounds of manure on the streets and 12 gallons of urine, and the cities were just impossible. So they invent...
That's a lot of horse shit, yeah.
It is a lot of horse shit. They invent the car. First cars, actually, and most successful cars at the very beginning of the century were electric. And they kind of dominated the field for a while, but then World War I made the precious metals that made up these cars necessary for the war effort, so they dissipated. Next came the external combustion engine, which was steam, similar to what railroads and steamships use. But they were a pain in the ass. So ultimately, the internal combustion engine becomes the technology of dominance in this field. Henry Ford figures out how to build them at a prodigious rate, and suddenly there's cars everywhere. The problem is that the internal combustion engine is run by gasoline, and gasoline doesn't burn cleanly in these engines. And I don't know if you're old enough to remember, Mike, but cars used to have terrible backfiring on the streets and puffing stuff out and stuff. So in 1926, three wonderful corporations, General Motors, Standard Oil, and Dow Chemical, form the Ethyl Corporation. The Ethyl Corporation comes up with an additive to put into gasoline to help the internal combustion engine burn cleanly. That additive was lead. Okay. For 70 years, they had total access to the data and information concerning humans and lead. They never once told the truth about what it was doing. Yeah. The result was more people have died because of big car and the use of that machine and its spread than were killed in World War II.
Wow.
The Sloan Kettering Institute, which is, you've heard of, it's one of the biggest hospitals. Alfred Sloan, the CEO of General Motors, and Howard Kettering, the head of DuPont, are responsible for more people's deaths than communism and Nazism combined.
Jeez. Yeah, that's...
And nobody knows anything about this because it was covered up for year after year after year after year. It never really came out. The only reason we lost the internal combustion engine was because we had a big oil spill in Santa Barbara, which is where I live. And Richard Nixon came out and walked on the beach going, tisk, 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 and decided that the man he was probably going to have to run against for his next election was going to be Edmund Muskie, who had a following in the ecology movement. So he decided to try and steal his constituency, and he forms the Environmental Protection Agency, which you could win a lot of bar bets by saying which president. Nobody would ever think it was Nixon. So the EPA is formed, and it issues in 1970 the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act specifies that 5 years in the future, every car in America must have a catalytic converter in its engine. They feel pretty confident about this because at that point in time, there was no such thing as a catalytic converter. It hadn't been invented yet. And they figured, Mike, they had another decade of selling leaded gasoline. But one of the movies I did when I was in the entertainment business was called Revenge of the Nerds.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
The nerds, one on this is that they invent the catalytic converter. In 1975, it goes into cars. Again, you're probably old enough to remember gas stations used to have two pumps. They would have leaded and unleaded. Leaded was significantly cheaper because they were trying to get rid of it as fast as possible, obviously. The problem was if you put leaded gasoline into these new engines, it smothered the catalytic converter and the cars died right in the gas station lot. So what they did was the next year change it so that you couldn't penetrate into a gas nozzle with leaded gasoline anymore. And that's finally how we got rid of leaded gasoline, but not until it had killed tens of millions of human beings.
Yeah.
And the way they were able to get away with it is it's not the kind of thing where you just inhale lead and you fall over dead. It takes years and years and years. It goes first into your body through your teeth and your bones. It then migrates up to your cerebral cortex and replaces the calcium in your prefrontal lobes and eventually makes you crazy and kills you. Think of the Mad Hatter and Alice in Wonderland. I mean, it's not lead is not something that humans should be ingesting. It's very bad for our species. And these people from the Ethyl Corporation just outright lied and said, no, there's no problem here.
For generations, right? I mean, from what I understand, they knew about this in the 19th, and it wasn't until
for
the
70 years.
I mean,
For 70 years, they covered it up, and they still cover it up. You ask the average person in America, what has killed more Americans than any disease or war? And nobody will say lead, because it never became, and I was shocked when I found, and again, one nice thing about writing a book for a publisher such as Columbia Business School Press is they don't let you opine, right? They say source, source, source. So I spent 4 years on this book, and half of an entire year was just providing Columbia with source data that anybody can look at. The World Health Organization has. I'll give you just one quick example. Is Duke Medical School did a study, which nobody has actually ever publicized, but it's just frightening. He did it on the rise of violent crime in America. It's on a fairly flat bar graph for most of our history. 1927, it starts going up and goes up and up and up. And it goes up every year until 1979, when lead comes out of our gasoline, and then it goes back down to where it was. Coincidence? No.
Yeah. And it's not just deaths. I've read stories. I'm Gen X, and I've been told that my generation has lost a collective total of millions of IQ points because of lead exposure.
Excuse me, billions, not millions.
There you go.
Your generation has lost well over 1 billion IQ points because of proximity to lead.
Yeah.
And, nobody did it on purpose. And the problem is not a single person in the history of our nation has ever been punished for this or held accountable for this. And most people don't know about it. I would urge people, go out and get the book. It's an easy read, by the way, because I'm a humorist before I'm a journalist, but you'll be able to read it and you'll see how they were able time after time to cover up. And it's finally one wonderful kind of scientific superhero, a fellow named Dr. Claire Patterson, who is a professor at Caltech in Pasadena. He was a geologist, not an oil person, but he found all of his soil samples were coated with lead. And he said, he began taking samples all over the place, and there was lead everywhere in the environment. And by the way, they're still finding it today. Today on the front page of the Los Angeles Times is a story saying that the places where these fires took place are not going to be inhabitable for quite a while because there's so much lead now in the topsoil from where it burned. And a lot of that is because particularly in the Pacific Palisades, it's the highest aggregation of Teslas of any place in Southern California. They all blew up. Their lead batteries spewed lead poisoning all over the environment, and they can't figure it. They don't know how to get rid of it.
Yeah. Of course, it's not just lead, right? I mean, if you look through the history of the automotive industry, from shatterproof glass to seatbelts to airbags, backup cameras, adaptive headlights, it seems like there's just a really strong pattern of there being a way to save people's lives, and the auto industry just really, really being foursquare against that sort of thing, and oftentimes with government sort of helping.
They weren't against saving people's lives. That unfortunately was not something that entered into the equation.
Okay.
They were into saving their ability to have nice stuff for they and their family, right?
Sure.
So, for example, General Motors puts out a school bus that has defective brakes. Rather than calling in the buses to fix it, the people who run it decide it'd be cheaper just to pay off the people who die than recalling all of the school buses.
Right.
It cut into their profits. Seatbelts had been around for 40 years before they finally got into cars. Nash tried to put them into cars in the late 40s. Didn't work. The only reason we have seatbelts in our cars today was because the airbag was coming up behind it, and Big Car decided it would be cheaper to put seatbelts in than having to put airbags in. And, of course, you ended up saving 10,000 lives a year. But here's just a couple of statistics for your audience that'll make them very happy. The average car on the road today in the United States weighs more than a German Panzer tank did in World War II.
God, that's something.
It is just as dangerous, right? It's the only business in the world that calls killing 50,000 of our species every year an accident.
Yeah.
Brother died in a car accident. No, an accident is when Mike spills his coffee. An accident is not when you're brutally mangled by this piece of metal. And so that was the problem. And what I did was I found in the book, and I think hopefully your listeners will find the stories interesting about the first road trip, about the invention of different things by women, etc., and about the staggering costs that people of color and minorities have had to pay in order for us to get big car dominance, because it wasn't always that way. One of the most memorable things I remember researching in the book, Mike, was in 1939, they had a big World's Fair in New York City. It was a big deal. And the most popular exhibition hall was run by General Motors. And it was called It's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow. And what it was a depiction of what Los Angeles would look like in the year 1960. And I want to live there. Yeah. And I grew up in Los Angeles in 1960. It was nothing like that. But it was just this ideal environment.
Yeah. You mentioned race, and I think a lot of people maybe are familiar, at least somewhat familiar with some of the automobile industry's pushback against safety regulation, but they might not make the connection between the automotive industry and racial injustice, whether it's intentional or not. Can you kind of talk a little bit about how that enters the picture?
Absolutely. Dwight Eisenhower, President of the United States, comes back from the Allied Supreme Commander to the U.S. and he says, we've got to have an Autobahn. This is the coolest thing ever, right? He gets the National Highway Defense Act passed. He first tried to pass it as just a way of getting roads built. It got voted down. He then wrapped it in the flag. And we still, by the way, just a quick aside, any of your audience who drives under a bridge in the next year or so, notice that every one of them are at least 13.5 feet above the ground. The reason for that was what it would take to drive a flatbed truck with a nuclear weapon on its back through it. And that existed today. So anyway, everything in America that wasn't nailed down was paved during this time. Tens of thousands of miles of roads are put in everywhere. But they give the power of eminent domain to local constituencies. These constituencies, particularly in the South, pick the areas where they're going to get least voter resistance, and they plow through African-American communities. In Los Angeles, they plow through Hispanic communities and remain so to this day. Right next to the amount of exhaust that's given off from living next to a freeway or a thoroughfare or whatever is increases your chances of dying proportionally. Secondly, because of these new roads being built, you have white flight from the city. People began moving out of urban areas into the suburbs. They're followed by shopping malls, by fast food restaurants and motels along the roadways. the center cities are still made up primarily of people of color. The reason for that is a thing called redlining, which is that realtors said, if you're a color, you can't live in Levittown. You can't live in my community. So these people are stuck there, but they've lost their entire tax base because all of the moneyed people have moved into the suburbs. So they have no money for maintenance, for transportation, for sewage, for anything else. And sure enough, urban blight very quickly subsumes people in that area. Secondly, insurance companies would not insure people of color. They would not give them policies unless they bought a top-of-the-line car. If you would buy a Mercedes or a fancy Cadillac, then insurance companies would, in fact, give you insurance. So it was the only way for years that Black people could drive. Well, big surprise. The foreclosure and repos on these were staggering numbers, and they just turned it over and over. So that's another egregious example of how people suffered from this. And probably the greatest, though, again, is that they suffered health-wise because they lived closer to the fumes of both lead and carbon dioxide and everything else. And the number of people who have become sickened and dying from that is disproportionately high amongst people of color.
You know, when you pull back and you talk about big car in relation also to a big bad thing, big tobacco, and you say there's sort of the three things that we see again and again. What they do is they deny harm, fund fake science, and externalize costs. And of those three things, I think denying harm, that's like the most obvious thing. But those other two things, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that. The history of, I'll put it in air quotes, research by Big Car about, because they've done quite a lot of research, haven't they? Though it's been...
Oh, they knew, and Big Car has been so artful in dodging responsibility. So I'll give you a great example. As any idiot would know, a giant piece of metal driving down a boulevard quickly that meets a small child in the road, invariably the child is going to lose badly. Tens of thousands of children were being killed by automobiles, and there is beginning to be a reaction against this. So what does Big Car do? They invent the crime of jaywalking. Okay, and they get the Automobile Association of America, the Boy Scouts of America, and the public school systems of America to join them so that everywhere you go in America in the 30s and 40s, you have scouts and other people herding pedestrians off of the streets into prescribed areas that Big Car wants them to be in so that they wouldn't keep hitting these people and be liable for it. So the invention of jaywalking is one of my favorite things in the book of how they did it and how they got away with it and how they accepted it. Also, the intrusion into our public education system, with the exception now of personal computers, there was no other product that as kids we were subjected to as much as Big Car. Every school had a driver's education program.
Sure.
Oftentimes it was one of those popular programs in the school because up until the 70s, they showed these public service films in the schools that were far worse than Jaws or any other horror film.
Blood on the highway,
It
were
was
rough.
just story after story with extreme close-ups of teenagers being mangled and killed. On those days, there wasn't a single kid absent from school. It was the most popular program shown. So they were able to do that. The second thing they were able to do was gain control of the government who was supposed to be watching them. So the Transportation Department has supplied 90% of lobbyists who work in the public sector. Mm-hmm. And the way it works is Mike is working as a bureaucrat for the Department of Transportation. David comes in and he says, Mike, I live in a beautiful split-level house with a top-of-the-line car and take my family on vacations every year. How would you like to have a taste of that? Sure. Well, then here's what we need in the way of legislation, in the way of oversight, etc. And this revolving door just keeps going and going and goes up to this day. Yeah. 95% of elections that take place in America are won by the candidate who spends the most money. Big car outspends conservation organizations on an average of $15 to 1. Sure. It's no contest.
Yeah.
Chuck Schumer has received more donations from Big Car than any other member of Congress. Okay? So, do you think there's going to be much of an oversight to protect your and my interest? No.
Yeah.
There's not. Anytime there is a problem in public transportation, the answer is more roads. Pave some more, expand the highways. It's Einstein's insanity definition is that you just keep doing the same thing over and over and over, hoping somehow it'll be different. And no matter how many times you expand and put an extra lane, it doesn't matter. It becomes jammed and more people get stuck in that congestion. So what I tried to do in the book, not have it be all doom and gloom, was I went out and looked at other people like ourselves who realize this has got to stop or our species is going to become extinct. And I list 10 communities that have begun to try to bring about private car-free environments. And in fact, I'm building one right here in Santa Barbara where we will use our mass transit, our ride sharing, our bikes, our motor scooters and such to provide people with an alternative of not having to use their own car each day. And it's worked in places like Copenhagen and Taipei, and Tempe, Arizona has an entire community where nobody has a car, and it works. So we're not finished yet. But again, I would urge your listeners to read this book and then find ways that you can reach out to other people in your community that you can partner with to make mobility as a service something that doesn't kill us all.
You know, I think I'm picturing folks on the right who are listening to this, and I think a response they might have to this is, yeah, there are some serious problems with big car, but there are also some amazing things that our highway system and big cars given us, jobs, mobility, economic growth. And I can hear them saying, yeah, sure, you can have these little liberal folks in really built up urban centers, maybe that works for them. But if you're the rancher in Montana or just in some rural community, and it could be California, Colorado, who knows, that we actually have gotten a lot more from big car than big car is taken away from us. I'm sure you're familiar with this argument. I wonder, what do you make of it?
Well, again, the first third of my book is called Car Dreams. And what I do is I list the reasons why we were so quickly in just a 50, 60-year period all became addicted to using automobiles. The first and obvious one is that it shrunk the world. You could go to any place that you wanted and get there much, much faster than you used to be able to. Secondly is a whole generation of kids were freed from their parents by big car. In the old days, if you wanted to be entertained, you'd go to a family room and all watch TV together or listen to the radio or whatever it was. But the parents had total control over the remote. Yeah. Kids had no vote in what they do. When you get in the car, you can listen to anything you want. Sure. More importantly, you get in the car, you get laid.
Yep.
Which, drive-in movies proliferated, passion pits. And so that was a good reason. Secondly, thirdly, is that it made life much faster for people so that you didn't have to stop and eat a meal. You could just gulp a meal down through a fast food
Sure.
restaurant. So it helped us speed up life. But the problem is there are enormous benefits that we've gained from cars, and I point those all out in the book. But what I also try and point out is the price we're paying now for it is too high, is that these benefits are wonderful to us. But if we keep it up, within a pretty short period of time, we're going to be back to our great-grandparents' technology of riding horses and mules around places because there's not going to be much left of anything else.
Yeah. Another thing, I guess, at one point in the book, you talk about planned obsolescence and big car. And certainly, God knows they try to push you to get a new car. I have a 2024 Honda, and already they're trying to get me to buy a new one, which just seems nuts to me. But whatever. But it occurs to me when I think back to a long history of car owning. The first car I owned, this is going to date me, our early 80s AMC Concord, a company that's not even in business, right? But that thing was a piece of junk. And so it feels to me, but it feels like cars are a lot better built than they were, a lot safer. And so I wonder, I understand the planned obsolescence thing, but it seems like less of an issue than it used to be. I see a lot fewer rust buckets on the road. They just seem to be more reliable. So
That's absolutely, Mike, it's not true. The number of deaths from automobile accidents, it stayed the same. It's in the 50,000 a year in the United States alone. Worldwide, it's in the millions. They haven't made cars safer. They've made them bigger, and they've made them more efficient and using fuel. But they certainly have not made them safer. The dash panel of a modern car has more stimuli on it than an Apollo rocket had when we went to the moon. That's not good for people to be driving. About a quarter of all the people who die in car accidents each year are holding a cell phone in their hand when they're found in their cars. The new technologies have, yes, vastly improved how our cars function, but they certainly haven't improved the safety of how we live. We still are killing as many people as we ever have, and we'll kill a lot more because nobody is monitoring it for the government.
And I expect even if the numbers are the same, while the population's growing, that's still not, you're saying we could be doing a lot better if our priorities were different as a country, right?
Well, or if we just realize the price that we're paying.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the technology LiDAR, which is where you could, all right, so if you took a LiDAR picture of Cincinnati, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would think the whole city was nothing but a big parking lot.
Yeah, pretty much.
That is, if you remove the buildings and you just had the cars that were in the metropolitan area, you'd think that the whole purpose of this city was just to put cars into it. And that's what we've become. And the problem with that is that the exhaust from these cars contributes to global warming, and there's no dispute about that anymore, despite the fact that we haven't sent anybody to the latest global warming conference. The number of children and adults killed by big cars remain a constant. But according to the World Health Organization, last year, 1,300,000 people in Southeast Asia, Africa, and other third world countries died because of toxicity of cars. That's not a formula for success. So again, it all comes back down to what do you do in the name of profit? Yeah. There are alternatives to the individually, privately owned car. It's just a matter of people using their collective wisdom, finding each other, talking to each other, looking what other communities do so that you don't have to use your car every time you want to get out of your cul-de-sac to go shopping. Or you don't have to use your car every time you want to take a 5-minute drive where you could have gotten there just as easily if you knew that public transportation was going to have you there just as conveniently.
I got to wonder, in hearing you talk about that, I got to wonder, and actually in reading the book, it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. I sometimes wonder if we were so taken by vehicles because we're such an individualistic culture, or we became more individualistic as a culture because we've gotten so into these individual passenger vehicles. I probably feeds into both ways. I don't know, but
yeah, I think it was the both. Is again, the planned obsolescence was a very clever formula that came up by Alfred Sloan and General Motors. And one of the reasons for it was that the way they were able to get the Model T, which was the dominant car in the world for all the way through the early 30s, was to begin changing each year their models. And a guy there named Robert Early, who was a genius at this, began putting colors into the cars so you could have 2-tone and 3-tone cars. But also, a car was a way to be able to show your neighborhood how you were doing. So you drive by Mike's house, and his dad has a brand new Cadillac Eldorado parked in his driveway. Well, I can't take my new vacuum cleaner and put it in the driveway for people to admire, but they can see by that the Bernowski family's doing okay. So it was a way of allowing conspicuous consumption to become part of our national ethos. And so that was another reason why we did. It also was just the fantastic amount of money they spent on media. It was unparalleled. Nobody had ever spent this kind of, they had it with tobacco, spent a lot of money on it. And when tobacco disappeared, cars picked up that vacuum and it's interesting. I'd ask your audience to, for the next week, watch car commercials if they can. And what you'll see is in every car commercial, there's not another single car on the road except the one that they're selling, just like real life.
Yeah, just all by yourself. Yep. On that Pacific Coast Highway, no other cars. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Right.
Something I wanted to get to, I want to make sure I get to this. You bring up urban planners and traffic engineers in the book. It's safe to say they don't get a ton of love. Can you talk a little bit about the influence of these traffic engineers and urban planners and how they kind of contributed to our environment, which is almost like a built for vehicles first environment?
Sure. Become an engineer is a very long and tedious process. You have to do your undergraduate work and your graduate work, and then you have to, particularly if you want to become a traffic engineer, do even more work, right? The problem with this is that the methodology used in teaching these people is the same it was 1950. They're using the same textbooks they used then, which is the solution to urban transportation problems is to expand roads. Just make more of them. It started with cleaning off the sidewalks in the cities to get rid of vendors and everything, so you had more room for parking. It then went to building these freeways and thoroughfares. They got congested, you just build extra lanes. If they get congested, you build even more lanes. There's two big reasons for that. One is it's enormously profitable for the companies that are doing this. People who make asphalt, the people who make steel, people who make all the materials that we use to build our roads have just made immeasurable fortunes off of expanding our road system. Secondly is There hasn't been an organized opposition to big car ever. Ralph Nader had a brief when he did Unsafe at Any Speed, his book, but that disappeared very quickly. The same right-wing people who are saying, I'm not going to get rid of my car, the same people were saying, no one's going to tell me I have to wear a seatbelt.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just people don't like being told what they have to do. And so this is an enormous problem. Is you're up against being outspent 15 to government elections. You're being outspent 100 to 1 in media. Cincinnati newspapers, if they're going to do a story about cars, because they get $35,000 to $50,000 for a full-page ad, they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. The $50 obituary is not going to sway their opinion. So nobody's going to go after big money cars until people realize we have no choice.
Yeah.
Because if we continue to use big car the way we're using it now, it's not a question of if, it's just a question of when.
Yeah.
This problem will become so intractable that we'll either have to band together to form an alternative to mobility, or we'll become like every other 98% of species who ever existed on this planet and become extinct.
You don't technically need this car. You say that out loud to yourself. You say, I have no space. You say, I'm just looking. Then you click. Then you zoom in on photo number 87 and whisper, oh no. Then you text a friend, the one who always enables you. You say to yourself, this is the last one, knowing it is not. You don't need this car. But maybe, just maybe, this car needs you. Bring a trailer. It's never just a car.
Hey there, it's Dr. Sanjay Gupta with some exciting news to share. CNN is now streaming. That means you can read, watch, and stream everything in one subscription. You can watch news live 24/7. You can also explore catch-up videos and explainer videos, and you can also watch a library of CNN's originals, including my latest documentary, It Doesn't Have to Hurt. Just go to cnn.com/all access. I'm going to paint an optimistic sort of counter argument for this, and you tell me what you think about it. But for instance, it seems to me that while in my generation, and maybe in the generation after that, it was all about getting a car and getting your driver's license as soon as possible, kids seem to be less into that than they used to be. There's some good data behind it, I think, as well. Not only that, but we have EVs now, we have hybrid vehicles, we have even driverless vehicles coming on now. And you can sort of, if you're looking at this through an optimistic lens, maybe see a future where all of a sudden we're not nearly as car-centric, not because of government regulation, but just simply because cultural attitudes and technology have changed to kind of move us into something that's more sustainable. That's my optimistic picture. What do you think of it?
That's very optimistic, except that all of the things that you just described as solutions use the internal combustion engine. As long as that's the fixture that gets us our mobility, we don't have a chance. Because what it causes, even electric cars, even cars with these batteries are still lead-based, right? These hybrids still use a tremendous amount of gasoline to burn. And one of my favorite things was last night, my poor wife has to listen to me all the time doing this. We were watching the NBC Evening News, and the head of the Environmental Protection Agency comes on and says, we're not going to the climate change conference, and we intend to drive a stake through the heart of the environmental movement. Mike, the next 4 stories are about floods, fires, windstorms, and environmentally caused catastrophes throughout the United States.
Yeah.
It's like these people don't live in the same world that we do. They don't, for some reason, because they're making such enormous profits from it and living so well off of it. don't want to change, but we have to. We don't have a choice. It's not for us. We're old enough so that it won't probably wipe us out, but for our grandchildren, their lives are going to just be absolutely devastated unless something is done about Big Car. Yeah. And I, again, urge your readers, go out and find out what the truth of the story is. It didn't take a whole lot of investigative reporting to get it, but it's all there for them to see. But more importantly, then find each other and begin talking about what are some alternatives that we can save our grandchildren's life with.
And that, in fact, is something I want to make it clear to folks. You're not all gloom and doom. You talk about things that communities are doing and trying to sort of break this dependence on Big Car. And that, I guess, gives you at least a certain sense of optimism, right?
Absolutely. For example, Norway this year announced they have not had one single car fatality.
Wow.
Amongst their whole population.
Wow.
Okay. They were able to do that by just being sensible. Helsinki, Finland figured out how to tell every person in the city exactly when and where every form of public transportation, whether it's a bus or a tram or rent a bike or whatever it's going to be, so that traffic congestion in Helsinki is shrunk to almost nothing again. Because people have figured out how to get around. In Taipei, you don't have traffic jams anymore because you have 1 billion bicycles that people are riding. So there are alternatives. We just have to find which ones will work for your community and how do you do it before it's too late.
Yeah. And one more thing before we go. I know we've been talking about Big Car and your great book on this, but there's another project you're working on as well, and I was hoping you could tell listeners a little bit about that before we go.
Oh, thanks, Mike. I was a journalist before I became a movie producer. I realized that what's happening now under this administration on our college campuses is very, very serious. They are cutting off funding for research laboratories, for scientific inquiry, for foreign students being able to come over and work with American counterparts to invent stuff. And they're doing this without anybody reporting about it or talking about it because it's all local. So I've put together an organization. I ask all of your audience to look at universitiesspeak.com. It's a conglomeration of the top 70 college newspapers on our campuses who will, in December, begin to disseminate stories of what's happening in their communities because of the Trump cuts that are happening on their campuses. I would urge anybody within earshot of this to go to the University Speaks website to look at it. It's free. We're nonprofit. We're not affiliated with any political organization or movement. We just are the last group talking about what's happening in our campuses because of this and what you can do, what they're doing and what you can do to fight back.
And we will make sure to put that link in the show notes as well, so you can just go ahead and click on that. Click on that link. You don't have to remember anything, but yeah, okay. That sounds like a great initiative. And like I said, the book was fascinating. It was interesting to read, and I learned a lot. And so I'm just really grateful you wrote it. And thank you so much, David, for taking the time to talk with me today.
Oh, well, thank you, Mike. And if you're ever in California and you want to come by and have 4 dogs treat you like they've never seen a human before, come over to our house and come and visit.
I'll have to take you up on that.
Okay, great.
Thanks for listening to this Politics Guys interview. If you have a question or comment for us, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at mail@politicsguys.com. If you're not already a supporter of the show, we hope you'll consider becoming one. Supporters get ad-free versions of everything we release, our full-length midweek episode instead of just a preview, and access to our Politics Guys Discord group. It's a fun place with a great bunch of people. You can support us on Patreon, where you can even sign up for a free trial. And if Patreon isn't your thing, or you're a current supporter and want to give us a little extra one-shot contribution, you can support us on PayPal and Venmo too. You'll find links to all our support options at politicsguys.com/support and in the show notes. If you'd like to get our full-length midweek episodes, but you're not in a position to financially support the podcast right now, just email me. I'm at mike@politicsguys.com, and I will be happy to get that set up for you. And whether you're a supporter or not, we'd appreciate it if you could subscribe, rate, and review us on whatever podcast app you use, as well as sharing episodes on social media. And finally, a very special thanks to our wonderful executive producers. They are Wilma Moreno, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, and Jody Marie Miller.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,